Hey everyone, it's Chris Egger, and welcome back to Cannabis Capitol's Pop Politics for the first episode of season 2. I'm back from hiatus and I'm very excited for our guest today. I want to mention that Cannabis Capital is now available through your Roku enabled smart TVs as well. So you got to look for Cannabis Capital Network there. And we're live today, and I'm really excited to have Mr. John Armstrong, the founder of the Armstrong Law Group and a seasoned business attorney who, with 25 years of business experience, has about 15 years experience representing clients here in the cannabis space in a regulated best practice market space, right? And so he's been one of the pioneers in helping people get to the point of compliant operations, business structures. And we're here today to talk about politics. So John, welcome.
Welcome, thank you. Good afternoon.
That's good to have you, man. And we've had a few discussions offline, but this will be our opportunity to, kind of share your thought leadership in a few key and critical areas. Would you do me a favor? Because you and I talked about some of your successes in the legal sphere representing cannabis companies throughout the years. Give me an understanding of your law practice, kind of your trajectory, because I'd really like to give the audience an introduction to you. And remember, these are cannabis consumers, cannabis voters, as well as business professionals and people in the business. So, let us know.
Sure. So I've been around a while. In my sphere was primarily business and civil law, and then I had. It's like every year it's more years back, but I'll say it's right after California first legalized cannabis. All those years ago.
All right.
I had some of my business clients call me up and saying, "Hey, we want to be in the business of selling cannabis. Would you be our lawyer? And we need help trying to figure out, this regulatory framework, because there's this proposition where it's legalized, and, we just kind of want to have a lawyer kind of giving us some guidance on what to do." And at the time, it was a really interesting and kind of, frightening kind of proposition, because I'm looking at this going, well, this is like the reverse of prohibition in the 20s, where you had the federal government legalized liquor. And then some states, for a while were dry states, until, and some states like Utah, as are very, very restricted on when and where you can buy alcohol and whatnot, kind of in that kind of regime. And so as a lawyer, or having some sense of like history or whatever, of like, how do we regulate things? That was kind of the model, but the model that we had for cannabis was the absolute reverse, and which raised, interesting issues at the time, because it's like, okay, you're asking me to comply with California state law, but that California state law absolutely contradicts federal law. And so you might be completely legal under state law, but you are committing a federal crime. And right. I have to advise you of that, and then as an attorney, there's ethics issues at the time, because at that time it was like, well, we're supposed to uphold the federal government and the Constitution, which also includes the Supremacy Clause, which says a state law can't contradict a federal law is supreme. And we took an oath as part of being a lawyer to uphold that, And so consequently, we had to write these opinions with a lot of disclaimers about, hey, I have to warn you, and I'm not advising you that you should do this. I'm encouraging you to talk to your federal senator, or your whoever represents you in the House of Representatives, and lobby them to change the federal law as well, because until we have that marriage, we're just going to have issues, right?
Right. And I've always said early on, from my career perspective, when I got into cannabis regulatory policies and so forth, that people were getting victimized by the system, right? So they wanted to comply. They wanted to be part of a regulated market space. They wanted to understand it, but it was so broadly interpreted in 1996, right, with the Compassionate Use Act. And the plenary power of the people, cannot be restricted. It can only be grown when you do California legislation, right, through the ballot. And so people were trying to figure out how to come to some sort of regulatory harmony. So I'm assuming, right, in this early phase, you had a lot of, risk-taking, entrepreneurial, good life-blooded energy. I know the institutional money, but come into it, because for me, it was right around the Attorney General guidelines, right, in 2008, roughly that time, where our industry really started to lead the nation, so to speak, and starting to structure and demonstrate compliance, right? And is that really where because, you said about 15 years of experience directly in cannabis in the regulatory markets now, right? Like,
well,
companies?
Of course. And so this should try to explain a little bit how this works and like what is so unique about the evolution. And I remember one of a famous Supreme Court scholar, Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., said, a page of history is worth a volume of logic, right? And so it's really important to understand kind of the history of, the history of the country, the history of California, and the history of these regulations to kind of have an understanding of what's kind of going on. So, when we had in 1996, when California first says hey, we're gonna have compassionate, care, because we're gonna, primarily the idea was there's all these people that are cancer patients or other people with these other conditions that cannabis seems to be helping them, that are just terrible, terrible conditions. Give them weed if that's what they need. Let's figure out a way.
We're seeing early on that it was an appetite enhancer, if nothing else, and that eating food was helping sustain people through chemotherapies and things like that.
Well, it does, and just on the biology of that is that most any doctor worth his or her salt will tell you, or they'll say it's like, rest and food, right, is like what you eat has a big impact on your ability to survive chemo, because chemo is a poison, right? And so you have to be healthy, which you have to eat. But the problem is the chemo makes people not want to eat, so you don't replenish your energy stores, and so that's a big problem. And so cannabis kind of like makes people hungry again in that. So there's part of that as well. But what I was getting to was, you had the state when this California first said hey, we're going to legalize it, kind of flipping the bird to the federal government. But what they're very concerned was like local concerns, because they obviously had like lots of cities and counties upset, like, hey, you can't make me allow people to sell weed in my city or my county if I don't want to.
Time, place, and manner.
Right. And so in the regulations from the get-go, it was like, hey, cities, if you want to ban it, you can. And then what kind of came around, some memos were going around there's like think tanks and interest groups that educate like cities and counties and things. And they said, hey, FYI guys, if you don't put a ban on cannabis and or hemp in your city or county, what the problem you're going to have is, people get grandfathered in if they start operating these weed businesses, and you're not gonna be able to stop it, right? And so then we had this kind of mad rush that any, city that had enough money to have like a city manager or a city attorney immediately started drafting legislation to ban all cannabis and hemp. And some of them were even receptive to it, but they're like, look, we want to allow it on our own terms. We don't want to be forced to allow this or let people get grandfathered in and have weird stuff on our land use. So, we're just going to ban it. And that was the first time we saw this massive constriction of where people could operate a weed business. And what that had the impact on is, California doesn't have a lot of industrial property available. Like one of my friends who's a commercial real estate broker says, like, John, if you want to buy or sell or lease commercial space, there's only like 1 to 3% of inventory in the state.
Right. And with the current market, it's gotten even tighter with this big logistics hiccup and the screen to door delivery economy taking even some of the older, smaller space.
Right. 100%. And then you say, okay, now we're going to put a green zone overlay. So we're going to restrict the areas into those industrial areas and only a small subset of that. And so now you're like at a fraction of 1% are these properties that can be in a green zone, which meant those properties suddenly, minimum tripled, some 5 times, sometimes 10 times what they were, the value of those properties were just skyrocketed. And that caused an additional problem was now the most significant barrier to entry was being able to afford to lease or to buy property in a green zone where you can legally operate a cannabis business. Mm-hmm. Unlike any other business in the world, and I've been involved in many of these deals, and people just wanted to get in the business so badly, they would do these deals that just were almost designed to fail, where the landlord's like, look, not only do I want like triple or 5 times what normal rent would be for my space, but I want, 10% of your gross profits,
Right.
And all kinds of deals were struck, which were just not sustainable because cannabis is also a heavily taxed market as well. But people were so desperate to try to get in, they just kind of figured like, okay, let's just get in, get it going, and we'll figure it out, as we go.
And that's still really, that's a struggle for a lot of people. And I know that your clients go through those struggles. And I know that the people who are watching this will want to hear me say in this segue. So, one of the things we've been talking about, right, is this marketplace has changed. We've 5 years past 2016 AUMA. We're coming up on that in this coming November. And we have a lot going on there. But one of the things that you and I started our discussion about, and I think it's important us to get into on the front end, because it may take a minute, is Prop 45 and the explosion of the hemp and CBD marketplace, right? And the struggle for California's cannabis operators to understand why they were being treated in a separate class, right? So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to just let you know, what can you tell me about this Prop 45? Because I'm just getting up to speed on all the details on it.
Sure. So again, before we talk about Prop 45, we got to talk about the Farm Bill of 2018,
Okay.
the federal government passed, right? So Farm Bill of 2018, much to a lot of people's surprise, Mitch McConnell got his hemp bill kind of thrown in it last minute, got through committee, and became part of the Farm Bill of 2018, went into effect January 1, 2019. And what that did is, for the first time, created federal legalization of hemp. And what's significant about that is, when I say hemp, and this is a lot of people don't understand this, the hemp plant and the cannabis plant are the same genus and species of plant. They're both dogs, by way of example, right? But they're slightly different breeds of dogs, but they're still canines, the same, everything else. And the legal distinction is only in one molecule, which is the level of delta-9 THC that's expressed in the same cannabis L sativa plant. If it's 0.3% or less, it's hemp. If it's over 0.3% delta-9 THC, it's cannabis. And that is a biological distinction. It is not a legal distinction. Or excuse me, other way around. It is a legal distinction, not a biological distinction. But people automatically assume, when they think hemp, like, oh, it's not psychoactive, it can't really do anything. Well, one of the things that happened when they passed the Farm Bill in 2018, effective January 1, 2019, is the thought was, look, there's all these cannabinoids that are scheduled drugs that naturally occur in the cannabis sativa plant, but we don't want all these hemp farmers. We want to encourage hemp farming. We want to compete internationally in the hemp market. We think the hemp market's good for the United States, and there's a lot of products and textiles and a lot of things we do with hemp, and a lot of other benefits and health benefits from the hemp plant itself.
A lot of people use CBD as a way to talk about the benefits of cannabis. I see it as a part, the entourage effect. We could talk science all of it, that CBD was really where the play was with hemp. Right?
It was very big. And so what happened was when the federal government legalized it and said, you can move hemp in interstate commerce, and it also decriminalized everything except for delta-9 THC, right? And I'm not really clear if that was intentional or not, but that is how the Farm Bill reads, where they expressly decriminalized all these things that were in the Federal Controlled Substance Act, like Delta-8, like Delta-10, like other psychoactive cannabinoids. They decriminalized them if they were made from or extracted from hemp, right? Okay.
Was it an omission by design, or was it an omission by oversight? We don't know, but one of the...
Well, my educated guess was this, is I think their thought was Congress's focus was on Delta-9 because everybody knew about Delta-9,
yep.
Right? And they thought, look, we know these other cannabinoids are there, but usually they're not naturally expressed in a very large quantity. But we don't want to stymie this market we want to try to create. So we're just going to legalize it, and then we'll figure out over time what we have to do to try to pare that down. Now, the thing is when Congress passed that, a lot of states passed, reformed their hemp laws and modeled their hemp law after the federal government. And so they created the same exemptions, right? And so that meant that all of a sudden people were looking at it and going, hey, wait a minute, there are psychoactive THCs in hemp, and the law reads all extracts are exempt from the Controlled Substance Act. So why shouldn't I be able to do this? And I should be able to move this in interstate commerce. And so that happened. And people were asking me, like, John, what do you think? I said, I think that's correct. But I also think what's probably going to happen is that state regulators are going to figure it out faster than the federal government. And I figured it'll probably take about, 2019, I was telling people, like, about 2 years 2.5 years, maybe 3 if you're lucky. The states will start clamping down on this loophole to say like, well, no, we didn't mean, that, right? And so what happened is initially there was this huge, in 2019, there was this huge mass influx of people like shifting from cannabis into hemp, because they're saying like, hey, hemp is like paving the way. We have federal legality, we have state legality. This is the future, and everybody was really interested in CBD because of all the health benefits people were touting of CBD. The FDA approved a drug, Epidiolex. Its primary ingredient was CBD as a seizure medication.
Right.
But then what people found out, and I had the unfortunate pleasure of educating businesses about this and saying, look, when the FDA approves a compound, even if it's naturally occurring as a drug, you have to have a prescription to sell it. So you can't just put like CBD water, CBD food, CBD everything, or CBD in your local drugstore without a prescription, because it's a Schedule 4, but it's still a scheduled drug. It's the lowest level it can possibly be. It's very easy to get a script for it, but it still requires a subscription because the FDA hasn't approved it for over-the-counter use yet. And so what happened is a lot of people in the business market thought that there was going to be this huge CBD market, invested millions of dollars, bought massive grows and grew massive amounts of hemp. And all these people did all this CBD and made all this CBD, and then realized when the FDA started like giving cease and desist letters, like, hey, you can't run this business, it violates federal law. And then other large corporations are like, hey, yeah, we're not going to carry CBD. Amazon stopped carrying CBD and saying, hey, this violates FDA. We've talked to our lawyers. We're not going to go down for aiding and abetting a violation of an FDA law, right? And so everybody had all this CBD that they couldn't sell. And then of course the chemists, start going, well, what can we do with the CBD? And they start playing with it, and then they realize they go, hey, we can convert this CBD, into Delta 8 pretty easy, pretty cheaply. And this Delta 8, is pretty good stuff.
It has a different effect, right? But
it's not as it doesn't make you sleepy. So it's like kind of like some people told me it's more like it speeds them up a little bit, but they can think. It clears their head where they feel this kind of relaxation, but they feel kind of up, and they like it better, So there was this huge shift, which was really important because the hemp market for like hemp stocks, whatever else, there still presently isn't a huge demand, or at least there's not like textile mills and things that are really designed to process hemp stocks in huge demand yet. And so there was this huge influx. And I'll just tell you, in 2019, the price per kilo of CBD was more than the price of cocaine. That's how crazy it was, where the market spiked. It got to be like, people were selling a kilogram of CBD isolate for, I know people that did deals for like $15,000-$16,000 a kilo.
Right.
And then now it's $200 a kilo. Right.
And by the way, that was because manufacturing infrastructure and stuff like that hadn't really probably caught up to the demand.
No, people were buying up the entire supply. A lot of people were like trying to just buy all these things. People were trying to leverage it. I was involved with all kinds of people who were trying to do all kinds of deals and knew me from the cannabis space and, whatever. So it's crazy.
Let's get into that for a little bit, because we've talked about this. So, for the cannabis operator, right, who's gone through the process of getting the licensing and everything, they saw this as an issue, right? And they were supportive of Prop 45. And Prop 45, basically in California, kind of established a new regulatory environment that affects both sides of the equation, right? It would create some parallel.
And this is what I was getting at is so just kind of give you the history. So people started doing this massive conversion of CBD that they couldn't sell to Delta 8. The FDA had not issued any opinions regarding it. They hadn't made Delta 8 a prescription drug. It was one of these things, a lot of labs, couldn't even really test for it. And so a lot of people went into the Delta 8 market, which then really propped back up the hemp market. And then when they're selling Delta 8, they have basically like a cannabis lookalike product, a product entirely made from hemp. It's entirely made from the cannabis plant, but is psychoactive, can get you high. But the taxes on it, hemp is taxed like cabbage, right? Yeah. So there's no like special tax. So the only The only other additional tax anybody had to pay was sales tax.
Yeah, so like another indignity to the cannabis industry. Not only are we going to charge you 40% in taxes on your operating overhead, but we're also going to let somebody else compete with you directly who's paying,
Well, right. And so you have a similar product, right, that basically isn't taxed and it skirts kind of all regulations. There was no, I mean, for a long time, if you went to the Department of Agriculture, was the only type of hemp regulation body. It says, look, we regulate the growing of hemp. We don't regulate hemp manufacturing.
Right.
The city of Los Angeles issued a tax permit, not really a license, but they had a tax permit for hemp processing. And so some people were getting that because they're trying to like raise capital, whatever else. And it's like, so, well, you have to have some type of license, but there wasn't. And so what AB 45 did was to say, look, we're going to start regulating the processed hemp market. So if you're processing hemp, we're going to have, certain restrictions. And some of the things it did, and then what the cannabis people really wanted to see happen, they said, okay, no more smokable hemp flower, because that was, people were smoking hemp. And to ask people like, why would anybody smoke hemp? People would smoke hemp because if they like to smoke, number one, they like smoking things. They were afraid of smoking cannabis, and they might have enjoyed smoking cannabis, but they may have had jobs that if they tested positive for Delta-9, they would be, penalized or lose their job. If they smoke hemp, which was like super low in Delta-9 THC, they're like, look, at least I'm getting the CBD, and this is better for me than cigarettes. So this is a healthier alternative.
With distillate and with the extraction technologies, they were creating higher concentrations of the Delta-8 or the Delta-10 within the product.
They could, yeah, because there was no restriction. It was a completely unregulated market, right? And so what AB 45 did was to say, we're going to regulate hemp flower, and we're going to put a stop to it, and then we're going to figure out how to tax that, and that's going to be taxed differently than hemp as a normal agricultural product. And it also, we're going to tax, hemp oils, and we're going to put a complete ban on Delta-8, expressly Delta-10, and then there's like another clause that says, and any other psychoactive compound found in that you could extract from the hemp plant, to make it so in case there was like any doubt of like, a loophole, it's like, no, we're saying none of this. And what they did is AB 45 changed the definition of THC, which had been under federal and under state law until AB 45 was the level of Delta-9 THC. And then there was an addition of THCA by the U.S. Department of Farming and Agriculture. It said like, well, look, when you cut the cannabis stalk, it has THCA. That THCA, which is not psychoactive in itself, but when the plant starts decaying, immediately converts into Delta-9. So we need to know the Delta-9 potential. So we're going to count that towards the total THC content. Now California is basically saying, if we look at hemp to be hemp, we're going to look at any of these psychoactive THCs. We're going to look at Delta-8, Delta-9, Delta-10, THCO, or also known as THC acid, or THC acetate, any of those things we're going to consider as THC. So that's banned. And the only way you could sell that now is through a licensed dispensary, which kind of begs the question, like, well, if I have hemp that's been converted to that, I can't put it in the metric system because it's seed to sale taxing. So it's kind of created this other like gray area for a lot of people, in the short term of like, what do we do if I was doing this?
Essentially, though, it's brought the parity that was desired. So the cannabis industry now is unified again, whatever the product, whether it be hemp or if it's for human consumption in some form, right? Whether it be medicinal or otherwise, and it has any of the THC component or compound for the entourage benefits that go along with, CBD and all the other various good stuff. And that's, it's an interesting point now because I only have you, and I promise you, because I know you bill by the hour. So I wouldn't take more than an hour with you. This is a good point for jumping off, right? So does the DCC have an oversight component to, and this is, by the way, going to be a two-part question kind of. So, we talked about this, the Department of Cannabis Control is a unified or harmonized after the passage of Adult Use of Marijuana Act in 2016. They created, the Bureau of Cannabis Control, which everyone thought was essentially a DCC model, but there's two other, the California Department of Food and Agriculture and and one other that oversaw various elements of cannabis licensing. So retail, distribution, and then you had cultivation, manufacturing under different, and lab testing. So let's talk about that a little bit. Does the DCC have a role in this? And talk to us about what the DCC has changed in the landscape, politically here. And I'm going to tell you, so there's a few organizations out there right now that are talking about issues. Local control being a big one, taxation being another one, and social equity. Those are big three. But in this particular instance, what should we know about what's changed? How has the DCC changed, and are they part of Prop 45? It's a logical, or AB 45. It's a logical transition.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. We don't really have clear answers, and here's why: is part of what AB 45 did was to try to regulate the CBD market. And a big significant thing that it did for the hemp market in California in particular is to make it clear that we don't care, like the state of California doesn't care anymore about the FDA's position on CBD. California believes that CBD should be an over-the-counter drug. The World Health Organization determined it should be an over-the-counter drug. The original reason why it wasn't in the FDA was because the U.S. Department of Drug Enforcement Agency was pointing out that we were part of international treaties at the time, that we might not be in compliant with those if we completely descheduled CBD. And that was the thinking. And then later on, it was like, oh, well, it could affect your liver. But the reality is, if you look at those tests, Advil, like ibuprofen, typical over-the-counter drug, Tylenol, much more harmful to you in your liver in much lower dosage than CBD by comparison, right? So that's not really a valid, medical argument. And so what they did is they said, but here's what we want. We want oversight by the California Department of Public Health. And so that is the agency now charged for ensuring and licensing hemp products that are going to consumers, because the thought is particularly the CBD products are going to be in food, are going to be in water, are going to be in pet food. There's a huge market in pet food where people are believing, like I've heard all kinds of stories. People have told me about their dog was diagnosed with cancer or tumors, or their cat, and they put him on a high CBD or hemp blend of dog food or pet food or whatever, and their pet was like their dog was acting like a puppy again and whatever else. And there's a lot of people that believe that. I don't know if it's true or not.
There's anti-inflammatory benefits and things of that nature, right?
Correct. All of that. And so the California Department of Public Health now has been given oversight over these hemp-based products, and then it requires like, okay, if you're going to sell to consumers, you have to have some type of license, and that your product has to have some type of testing done, so we know what's in it, so there's no like other bad things that are in it, which is kind of like every state has like a mini FDA, and California's mini FDA is the California Department of Public Health. So like years ago in Orange County, there was a coffee shop that was doing CBD coffee, and then there was a lot of publicity about it at the time. And then the California Department of Public Health said, hey, we follow FDA. FDA says you can't do this, and until we have a statute that says otherwise. And of course, the owners were saying, well, wait a minute, I could buy CBD at the dispensary in California. But the difference is when we legalized cannabis and CBD for medicine to be sold through a dispensary, we didn't make it available for sale other than through a dispensary, right?
All right. So, and I mean it, John, since I only have enough time with you, we've really gotten into this, but it's just surprising to me that the DCC is not involved. Like, so they've once again confused this process again, it seems like, right? They brought it wide open. They created this department, they harmonized the internal structure of it. And it's been so frustrating because all these, dispensary owner operators, right? Cultivators throughout the state who have gotten into this. I mean, we've talked about it, the taxation is onerous, right? I mean, it's just nearly impossible to survive what's going on in terms of the regulatory yoke that's been placed with the taxation component, because you have to comply with all these best practices, and we do so. And then to have this, so it just seems to me like it's once again it's a misdirected solution, right?
It's hard, but to be fair to the government, right? This is all new for them. I mean, we have not historically had a cannabis agency, and so as far as the history of agencies goes, this is a relatively new thing, And so what they've kind of followed is what I'll call the Texas model. But which I guess isn't technically Texas because cannabis is illegal in Texas. But
right.
But the hemp product, right? but they have a Texas State Department of Health Services,
Okay.
and they're the agency that if you want to sell hemp products, you have to have a broker's license to bring hemp products into the state, and they have to go through that licensed broker. And if you sell to consumer, you have to have a consumer license, and those consumer products have to be tested and whatever else. And so what we're seeing is like a different model where we're trying to say, like, I think what the state of California is trying to say is we're going to have one system for people in the licensed cannabis space and one system for hemp products, but we are going to treat them differently. And if there's overlap, the issue is kind of how things work is if hemp gets too far out of tolerance, it becomes a cannabis crime back under our Controlled Substances Act, right?
Okay.
If your hemp is too far out of whack.
There's an enforcement angle to it.
There is, yeah.
Like I said, people who have fought to be regulated, right, in this market, right, probably your clients, right?
100%, and that's who they want to deal with, because, and I've had to deal with the situation where I've had law enforcement agencies kind of overstep where they're trying to enforce what are actually regulatory violations to the point of like seizing money, seizing product, and then having to go to court and get court orders to order a sheriff's department to release, product and money back to my clients that was seized. Because it wasn't, because they're trying to say like, oh, well, if you violate a regulation, you lose immunity, and this is an illegal drug deal. And it's like, no, if everybody's licensed in the commercial transaction, that is by definition not an illegal drug deal. An illegal drug deal, in the definition, there's a very clear definition.
The old school model.
Right? Well, it's basically saying like any commercial transaction with a non-licensed person, other than, business to consumer. If it's like retail, like licensed retailer to consumer, that's okay. And as long as the quantity is not over a certain amount, right? But if the commercial transaction, business to business, if everybody holds a license, it is purely a regulatory matter. And so part of the problem is we're not having, the DCC, which used to be the BCC, like really kind of be a more proactive and tell law enforcement, hey, step out, or if you see this issue, let us deal with it, regulate it, because they have detailed rules on what happens if these things are out of tolerance, or if you don't have the right license for storage versus something else. They have this built into the regulatory system, and they're the ones that need to be doing it. And the people who are my clients that are in the space are going, look, we want to deal with the Department of Cannabis Control. We don't want to have to deal with the sheriff because they're much slower. They don't know what they're doing, and it gets kind of crazy.
And the whole purpose of being regulatory compliant is so you don't have to deal with the sheriff.
Well, right. Yeah. Or you're not getting arrested, it's like, so this shouldn't be arrested time. This is like, no, we have an administrative agency come to us because this isn't like.
So do you think the DCC is going to do a good job of standing up for us? I know that Lori Ajax, was trying to get the thing organized. Now, Nicole Elliott, who's leading the Department of Cannabis Control, right? That's the evolution, right? Do you think that these problems are going to start to diminish? And what are your clients saying about their working relationship right now with the DCC? They've been touting a lot of success in organizing their department and getting a grant for some program funding and stuff like that. But are they doing a good job?
I think everybody feels like they're doing the best they can what they have to work with. Mm-hmm. It's pretty clear that they're not fully funded. They're still being trained. They still don't really understand the market that they're trying to regulate. They don't understand market realities. And some of these things have been kind of like, things that made sense when we first started legalizing cannabis. Like, for example, the tax on cannabis flower right now is about $155 a pound. And that's what the California State Taxing Agency, that's what they're saying. It's like an impost, like that's what it is, whatever. Now, when they first started regulating flower, the market for like decent flower was, anywhere between, $1,000, give or take a couple $100. And you'd say, okay, well, if it's 150, it's about 10%. That's not terrible, right? Okay. Now California had a huge, production of flower. Everybody's supply and demand. Now flower is selling for $200 a pound, wholesale, right? And the wholesalers are having to pay $155 in taxes. And so all these licensed cultivators are going out of business or getting bought up by bigger cultivators. So we're going to have less competition, and we're going to see these market corrections. And the problem is we need like more dynamism. We need a more dynamic response. We need things to look at economic reality. We need to look at cannabis prices as a commodity, like oil or ethanol or other biological commodities, where you'd say like, look, you can't tax a flat tax, that doesn't look at what the market is.
in
Yeah,
such high fluctuation, right?
correct. It has to be adjusted on what a what's called a rack price. If you've been involved in like ethanol markets, they have centers where you can buy, because it's a commodity, right? It's like saying, okay, well, how much are you buying whatever, or gasoline, same thing. It's like there's whole houses and there's a wholesale price where it's kind of averaged out. And then it's like, okay, the tax is, kind of a percentage based on what that is. And then it makes sense. But if you have the tax set at a standard based on a pricing model that doesn't take into economic realities into account, you're going to have issues with either people trying to use burner distros to try to evade taxes. People are going to try to engage in all kinds of other
we're going to go there, right?
Activities. Yeah.
That's a big issue that was put front and center in lawsuit that was filed against the DCC. And this idea that there are people who are working within the legal framework who are also part of this, and it's because the system's broke. Here on this show, we talk a lot about, and I'll be reminded by folks because, this information, these details, it's important for us to understand it, right? And you're front and center when it becomes something that needs to be litigated, or if there's, some sort of, interaction with the DCC. But, what's going on with that? How is the DCC going to best serve the professional cannabis operator, the people who have been compliant, who've been doing their work? I mean, because we talk about it, taxes, local control, and social equity. Those are the three big issues that politics has been focused on. And I'd love for you to touch on some of that with me.
Well, a couple of things. Some things that need to happen is, we definitely have a public policy, and we as a people of California are pro-cannabis. I mean, the majority of Californians are pro-cannabis. At this point, we think like it should be there. And most people say it should be regulated like alcohol, or tobacco, and the reality is we're not there yet, and we should be there. And we really need to be looking more at that model than this model that we've kind of created from scratch that isn't really effective or working. We know in the alcohol market, like what type of taxing system works that makes it, encourages legal businesses and discourages organized crime, right? And we need to have a model that's like that. And so we need something that's more dynamic. We also, a lot of people that are new to cannabis, and a lot of people who are in cannabis have never been in a cannabis business before, but it's something they're trying to get into. And there's not really a lot of education programs for them. And a lot of times, like part of agency regulation and the benefit of agency regulation is to have something other than having your head cut off if you make a mistake. It's the idea of what a regulatory, when you have regulation versus the criminal law, you're trying to say is like, look, we know you're going to make some mistakes, and it's our job to correct you and to educate you on what best practices are, right? And so
by the way, the fact is, and I got to be honest with you, John, it's a frustrating thing. I myself, having been an entrepreneur, an activist entrepreneur, and then a member of different formed companies, is that they never seem to listen to the industry when we were trying to explain to them. They see the benefit now, and they get that we are, good students or good stewards of, of the licenses, that we're people that want to contribute economic, prosperity and development to communities, that we bring jobs, that there's tax revenues. I mean, the Orange County grand jury report that outlined how much money had been contributed by the adult use marijuana tax to supporting youth programs in the city of Santa Ana always made me laugh to think that only potheads are supporting kids in the community, right? You know what I mean? But, so, at what point is the DCC, I mean, what could fix what they've got going on? Because we've talked about the California Cannabis Reform Initiative on here. We've talked about legislative agendas, and that's going to be something I close here on in a discussion, because there's different people in the industry and in the advocacy activist world that see these problems as really strong. But I mean, have you had success working with the DCC? Because I know this issue of provisional licenses and annual licenses is still out there. There's just a ton going on there, right?
The provisional licensing is kind of pretty much died away at this point, and so now it's just regular licensing. I will say that compared to like when we first started trying to apply for licenses, that process was much more expedited. Now I'm seeing it's taken on average 6 months to a year, to get the state license, going, which is, and that's part of the issue too. It's like when people have all their ducks in a row and they have the local city license, it used to be like you could get this provisional license so you could get operating right away. And we don't really have that program anymore. It's like, well, now your application's in queue, but you're not technically licensed yet and whatever else. And we need to bring like that back at a minimum to say like, look, if you have a local license and you've applied for the state license, you need to be given a provisional license until you do something, really, really stupid. And even if you make some mistakes, it should be education process and just fix whatever, violation goes along the way. And we'll go through our deduction so we can go through that process. We need to expedite that process. We need to eliminate a lot of the business, like most businesses are not taxed business to business, like wholesaler to wholesaler, distributor to distributor. There's not another industry where that's taxed, but cannabis it is. And so that makes it harder and more difficult to run those businesses. The other problem is a lot of giving so much power locally to these other industries trying to comply with these very onerous local requirements also makes it more expensive, and also the land use restrictions makes it harder to find and be able to afford real estate. So we need statewide policies to basically limit how much local jurisdictions can regulate cannabis and how much they can tax them, like to basically put some caps that are reasonable on that. Because the reality is that if we have, I'm not saying it shouldn't be taxed. I'm just saying presently it's overly taxed. And if part of the goal is to have a successful white cannabis market, when I mean white market, I mean legal
black market, white market, gray market. I get it.
Yeah. As opposed to an unregulated market or a black market, it's like, if that's what we're trying to stamp out, is we have to make it easier to get into that market. We have to make it easier to operate in that market, and we have to make it more affordable and profitable. So people really want to invest, in that.
Well, let's get into this then as the final issue. Corona, Costa Mesa, a lot of communities are going to be introducing new licensing opportunities, right? We've talked about this. Real estate is a big, point of contention, right? Finding the right real estate and then having the ability to afford holding it through this 6 month to a year or even longer process. But what do you see happening moving into 2022? Because local access and this League of California Cities played a huge role in making sure that cities and municipalities would have the time, place, and manner or banning, capabilities in the legislative framework of AUMA. But what's going on looking at 2022 on that front? Because we got a couple more minutes here, and I want to make sure that we touch on this one too.
Well, certainly what there's a lot of jealousy going on. And so a lot of cities that were like, no, we don't want to do that, are looking at their neighboring cities that have allowed it. And instead of being, for want of a better phrase, a shit show, it was like, they're doing really well. I mean, most cannabis dispensaries you go into do not look like a tattoo parlor, do not look like a strip club. It looks more like an Apple store. They're super clean. It's like you're looking at like things are in glass jars. People are very professional, and the people that are frequenting those places to purchase things tend to be more sophisticated consumers and higher income earners, right? So it's not like this kind of dingy thing. It's like you're more likely to see that type of like seedy type client at the illegal dispensary where their prices are a lot lower, but things aren't regulated, and so what might be in your product is a lot less certain, right? But if you're looking at licensed things, it's much cleaner and safer.
Do we see like, a relief valve coming with the amount of new licensing communities that are opening up? Is there going to be?
It's not going to be enough. It's going to be, it's kind of like putting your finger in the dike. It's like saying like, look, the demand for cannabis is there for the consumers. And what we've really done a fairly poor job in California is kind of put a lot of barriers to consumers to have access to cannabis.
Yep.
We have better access than we used to. A lot of states looked at because California was first. We led the charge, but states like Colorado, Oregon, Washington, really, and Nevada looked at how we did things, saw what they thought was working and what wasn't working, and then made it easier for consumers to have access, made it harder for different localities to restrict the ability of people to operate a cannabis business or to tax one out of existence and whatnot, and made it easier for even things like delivery. Like California, like the delivery requirements is very difficult compared to like in Nevada. or even people participating in a cannabis business, and part of it is the Department of Cannabis Control is saying like, look, we want anybody that's involved to have a license, but what they don't understand, it's like, if you have to have a license to participate, let's say I'm just a brand, like I'm a marketing guy, I came up with a cool logo and I want to do a brand and I'm going to work with all licensed people. They're saying, no, I can't do that unless I have equity or sufficient equity in a licensed cannabis operation. Well, the value of that operation is a minimum $1 million. And that means I have to, put a whole bunch of money in to get, or
even though the product you're putting the label on,
right,
and doing all the work on behalf of is
correct,
a compliant product that's in metric, you're not allowed to do that. And so,
right, because if I'm not a licensee, then they feel like they don't have jurisdiction to find me personally or whatever else. And so, but these types of things kind of hinder the market, right? And other states don't do that. And so they have a more open market. They have a much easier market. And frankly, like our consuming public in California, we're like the largest cannabis producing state. We're also the largest cannabis consuming state. And yet we have more restrictions on access to cannabis than pretty much every other state that's legal.
And that's where I'm getting at. And that's one of the reasons I was thinking it would be interesting to have you on here today, is to really discuss where the breakthroughs need to happen, right? And so from the political perspective, situation normal, all effed up, right? In a certain degree, but in other degrees, you've had the ability. So if we could end on one note before I go, and close out the show, if you were saying to someone who is looking from the perspective of a longtime activist, supporter of cannabis legalization, attended the normal meetings, voted yes on this stuff, thought somehow or another eventually, and I've met a number of them along the road that I've been involved with, what would you say to someone today is the most, like the top 3 things that they should do if they want to like grow a cannabis business in the regulated market in California today? Or would you even say go to Oklahoma, go to Michigan? It's going to be much easier on you. The investment that you'll put into living there and relocating would actually be more of a benefit. Or do you see a pathway here in California emerging?
It's California is probably the hardest cannabis market to be successful in. It is the largest market. It is a much longer term play. If you are looking to get in and start making money sooner, being in a state like Michigan or Oklahoma or any of these other states that have gone green, or even Nevada, you're going to have an easier time than you are in California. However, I do think though, over long term, you will get a bigger reward, but it's going to be much delayed gratification. I mean, most cannabis businesses aren't profitable until about year 3 of operation, right? Yeah. And that's the economic reality. I mean, I'm in it. I'm working with a whole bunch of different businesses, and most of the people, when they put out their pro formas, they say year 3 is the year we start making money. Like we've made enough money to cover our capital costs, the taxes, and all these other things. Now we're actually finally starting to make money. Now, that for the same investment, if you're in Oklahoma, you could be making money in year 1, or in 6 months. And so it depends on what you're looking for. Now, I also think that we're going to have federal legalization. I think that's what the next 2 to 3 years we'll have federal legalization, and that's going to be a game changer. And I think anybody that has a California license has a winning lottery ticket waiting when that happens, because that's when bigger companies are going to come in and just buy up all the licenses, buy up all the real estate, and it's going to be a much, much different play, and people are going to be able to cash out on that. But it's going to be a struggle, for that 2 or 3 years before that even happens. So that's really what you're looking at.
And it's sad too, because, in the political realm, you always hear about business departing for other states, right? From California.
Yeah. No, it is. And that's why we had major, just give an example. I'm not going to name names, but I've been involved in some major acquisitions and looked at major acquisitions, and there were several major players in the cannabis market, like people that raised billions of dollars and who were multi-state operators. And in 2019, 2020, they were very interested in being in California and dominating the California market to raise capital for investors. That model has radically changed, where most people don't want to be invested in California. If they're a multi-state operator, or an MSO, we call it, they're looking at these other states. They're looking at New York. They're looking back east. They're looking in the Midwest, and they're looking like, because they're saying, like, the taxes are less, the regulations are less, the profitability is greater, right? And they're giving fewer licenses, but those licenses cover like the whole state kind of thing. And so if we do those type of acquisitions, we're making way more money and can show something to the investors than we can in the California, because the California is such a much harder market to break into, be successful at, and the return on investment takes so much longer, and the return is less because a significant part is the taxation. What people aren't even, and I'm not even talking about the federal taxation, because remember, we have,
right.
And
they're planning. They have plans for that, and it's a significant plan. And I always laugh because money doesn't grow on trees in this industry, right? It seemingly does in theory, but it is something that everyone looks at it as a cash cow. They look at it because they didn't understand what the cost would be for regulatory compliance, and that change is what's happening to the people who are core to the industry, that have the brain trust, the knowledge, the like you said, people coming into it. Agribusiness has existed in California for the time immemorial, right? However, an understanding of, some people grow almonds, some people grow grapes, and cannabis farmers were in an operating market for the past, there's decades of experience. And I am kind of drawn down here. I'm gonna kind of wrap it with us today, because we've had this hour with you, and I want to tell viewers, right? So John Armstrong of the Armstrong Law Group was on it here today. He was talking to me because he wanted to make sure I had a clear understanding of the legal, kind of structure and what's going on, and his expertise in structuring these deals and everything, and actually structuring the operating businesses. Because as someone talking about politics here in the state, you have to be aware of what it leads to. So 2016 did not lead to what I think should have happened, which was a robust and really thriving economic driver for the state of California. Something we could be a global leader in. What's happened is it's a lot of other states to get ahead of us, right? We do something right in California, we screw it up. So John, that was a real in-depth, and really your thought leadership and demonstrated, all that experience that you've gained over it. I really do appreciate it. And I ask all my, interviewees on here, do you have anything that I didn't ask you or that you wanted to cover really quick as we start to kind of wrap up here? Because, I want to give an introduction to what will be happening next week too, and everything on the show. So.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I was just finish up with the IRS, 280E, which is cannabis at a federal level is still taxed as if it's cocaine or heroin, right? So their only business deductions they get are cost of goods sold. They don't get standard business deductions. In order to be compliant with most like state and local regulations, you have to show that you filed your federal and state income taxes. So, which means these cannabis operators are paying a tremendous amount more of corporate income tax than any other business. They're having to pay like extremely high rates of rent to their landlords, which is like a secret tax, right? And they're being heavily taxed on a tax regime that's not really even consistent with market realities, right? And so when you ask me, it's like, why do I think it's overtaxed? And it's like, that's why, right? And that's why you're hearing about this cannabis bill in the federal government that Chuck Schumacher's promoting. Is part of that is to get banking, right? Because that banking is also a big issue. Like most cannabis businesses have trouble finding a bank, and that's a safety issue.
Loans,
and that's a safety issue too.
Real estate loan versus 19% from the private money market.
Right. Like they don't qualify for US SBA loans like everybody else for small businesses, and all these others don't qualify for the same type of insurance. The insurance rates are astronomical. So there's so much more cost of operating these businesses. A lot of people don't understand that and I've seen a lot of black market operators go into the white market and then go right back out again, because they're like, hey, I was, 80% profitable as a privateer. And now I'm like, I'm like 10 or 15% profitable, And so it's like I said, yeah, it's a volume game. It's like, and it's a distance game, And so
there's the business to business and the business to consumer tax here in the state of California, but then there's also the federal tax on the operative, kind of model.
Right.
And these are changes. So, I hope that we can count on you. It's at Cannabis Capitol, we call it the common ground. And what we've really been doing is trying to bring together different thought leaders. And it may be that you can contribute in some way to our, legal panel in that regards, right? Folks who are coming together, to talk about these issues. So from that perspective, I want to make sure that, how much I appreciate your time. And I will let you know that we will be inviting you back and looking forward to having you participate, maybe in some roundtables, because what we've done right now is, kind of set up this show to talk about these issues, get consumers educated, and then from getting that education out there, also start to dialogue and create that common ground. I believe personally that we haven't done enough to actually be the leader that we're destined to be in this industry nationally as a state here in California. And I also believe, more importantly, that we have to have these discussions if we're not as a unified front, because everyone has, everyone got competitive and everyone said, well, I have my license, so I don't want other people to have theirs. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to have, I want to have barriers to entry. We have local control issues. We have the League of California Cities that put those roadblocks up. We have 80% of the, the California cannabis market is illicit. 20% is, what you're calling best practice regulatory compliant. People want that product. They want access to it. It's got to be easier. It's got to be simpler. In 2016, it was so exuberant. The grease got put on the squeaky wheel, and we were, that's kind of my view. So anyway, I just want to make sure that you know how much we appreciate your time today. The depth of experience and knowledge that you shared today was, I got, a great schooling today on some of the legal protocols that are going along right now and the change that's happening. And I want to say thank you.
All right. Well, my pleasure. But to your point, Chris, and I often hear this, a lot of other thought leaders in the cannabis space, and what the thought is if we don't say it, nobody else will. Like we have to be the voice, because everybody expects somebody else to step up and somebody else to say what's going on, but it's really on each of us every opportunity to talk about what's going on, because if we wanted to change it, then that's going to take every voice and everybody has to step forward.
I appreciate that. And you know what? Meaningfully, thank you for the time today. And we will look forward to catching up soon. And, here on Cannabis Capitol's Pop Politics, we do this weekly, everybody. And so one of the things that's come up recently has been this week, the We for Warriors group put out a pretty heavy editorial into the Sacramento Bee. And so over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be trying to get in touch with I guess it's the UCBA, which is one of the cannabis industry associations that does a lot of lobbying, to kind of get some perspective from them, because I'm a big fan of point counterpoint, right? Like I want to hear what people are doing. And the Weed for Warriors, what they're saying is that there's roadblocks right now to expanding licensing in California from inside the industry. And then on the other hand, the industry is up there, and I know they're knocking on doors saying we got to expand access, right? And I'm just wondering if it's a different perspective on why. But that's to everybody. Hopefully by next week, we're going to have one of those two groups on here, because I'd really like, I know Jonathan, who founded or is a member of the executive board of the UCBA, and he was Angeles Emeralds, I believe, for a long time. And then, of course, Kiernan's been a guest on this from Weed for Warriors. So everybody, stay tuned, and hopefully we'll see you back here on Thursday for that run of topics. But once again today, Mr. John Armstrong of the Armstrong Law Group, I want to say thank you. And signing off for Cannabis Capitol's Pop Politics, this is Chris Egger saying have an awesome day. It's almost 4:20 somewhere.